The little girl stood outside the crowded diner with one hand gripping the strap of a faded backpack and the other resting nervously against the metal crutch beneath her arm. Rainwater dripped from the hood of her thin gray jacket, forming tiny puddles around her worn sneaker. Through the fogged window, she could see warm yellow lights, families laughing, plates of hot food arriving at tables, and people sitting close enough to one another to feel like they belonged somewhere. She had been standing there for almost 10 minutes, watching everyone except herself have a place to sit. Then she noticed a man sitting alone near the window, with a little boy beside him. The man had a tired face, a work jacket still covered in traces of dust, and the quiet expression of someone who had learned to carry more pain than he ever talked about. The girl took a breath, pushed open the diner door, and slowly made her way toward him. When she finally stopped beside his table, she looked at the empty chair across from him and asked in a trembling voice, "Can I sit here?" What happened next would change 3 lives forever. If you believe that kindness can give someone a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes one small act of kindness can become the reason someone chooses to keep going. The man at the table was named Marcus Bennett, a 38-year-old single father who had spent the last 6 years rebuilding his life one difficult day at a time. He worked long shifts as a maintenance technician at a manufacturing plant outside the small town of Millbrook, Ohio. His hands were permanently rough from tools and machinery, and his back hurt almost every evening, but he rarely complained. His 9-year-old son, Caleb, was the center of everything he did. Marcus had become a single father after his wife, Rachel, died unexpectedly following a sudden illness. He had never planned to raise a child alone. He had never imagined packing school lunches at 5 in the morning, learning how to braid hair for school plays, sitting awake during thunderstorms, or choosing between paying a medical bill and fixing the leaking roof. Yet every morning, he got up and did what needed to be done. That rainy Thursday evening, Marcus had taken Caleb to the diner after Caleb's soccer practice. Their apartment had no working stove because the landlord was replacing the kitchen appliances, and Marcus had promised his son they would have burgers and milkshakes. Caleb was talking excitedly about a goal he had almost scored when Marcus noticed the girl standing outside. She looked about 11 or 12 years old. Her clothes were clean but worn. Her dark hair was tied loosely behind her head, and her left leg ended just below the knee. A lightweight prosthetic leg rested awkwardly beneath her coat, but she seemed reluctant to put her full weight on it. Instead, she depended on a single crutch and moved carefully, as though every step required a calculation. Marcus watched her hesitate at the door. He assumed she was waiting for someone. Then she walked inside. The girl looked around the diner, searching faces. Her eyes moved from table to table until they finally landed on Marcus and Caleb. There was an empty chair across from Marcus. She approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. She looked embarrassed even before she spoke. "Can I sit here?" Marcus glanced at the empty chair and then back at her. There was no hesitation in his answer. He pulled the chair out and told her she could sit there as long as she wanted. The girl froze. She seemed almost shocked that nobody had asked questions first. She lowered herself carefully into the chair and placed her crutch against the wall. Caleb stopped talking about soccer. Instead, he quietly pushed the basket of fries toward her. The girl stared at them. Marcus told Caleb that sharing food was never a problem, especially when someone looked hungry. The girl immediately shook her head, insisting she wasn't hungry. But her eyes never left the fries. Marcus didn't argue. He simply ordered another plate. Her name was Hannah Carter. She told them she was waiting for her aunt, who had promised to pick her up after school. But her aunt hadn't come. Hannah had waited outside the library until it closed, then walked several blocks to the diner because it was the only place she knew that stayed open late. Her phone battery had died, and she didn't know her aunt's number by heart. Marcus asked whether she had somewhere safe to go. Hannah looked down. She said she did. But the way she said it made Marcus realize that the answer wasn't really yes. She explained that she had been staying with her aunt for several months after her mother died. Her father had never been part of her life. Her mother had passed away after years of complications following an accident that had also taken Hannah's leg when she was younger. Her aunt had initially welcomed her, but recently things had become difficult. Bills were piling up. Her aunt was working 2 jobs. Arguments had become common. Hannah didn't complain about her aunt. That was what struck Marcus most. She kept defending the woman who was supposed to protect her. She said her aunt was tired. She said her aunt was doing her best. She said she didn't want to be a burden. Marcus looked across the table at this little girl who seemed to have already learned one of the saddest lessons an adult could learn, that sometimes children blame themselves for problems they never caused. Caleb quietly asked Hannah if she liked soccer. Hannah smiled for the first time. She said she used to. Before the accident, Marcus noticed something change in her expression when she said those words. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was the look of someone remembering a version of herself she wasn't sure she was allowed to miss. Caleb told her that missing something didn't mean she had to give it up forever. Hannah looked at him. Then she laughed softly. For the first time that evening, the table felt warm. But the moment didn't last. A woman hurried into the diner, soaked from the rain and visibly panicked. She looked around before spotting Hannah. Her face immediately filled with relief. It was Hannah's aunt, Rebecca. Rebecca rushed to the table and apologized repeatedly. Her car had broken down several miles away, her phone had died, and she had been trying to find Hannah for more than an hour. Hannah stood up and hugged her. Marcus could see the exhaustion in Rebecca's face. She looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in months. Marcus didn't judge her. He simply offered to drive them home. Rebecca tried to refuse, but the rain had become heavier, and Hannah's prosthetic leg was clearly causing her pain. Eventually, Rebecca accepted. Marcus loaded Hannah's backpack into his truck while Caleb climbed into the back seat. The drive was quiet. When they reached Rebecca's small rental house, Marcus immediately understood why Hannah had been reluctant to talk about home. The front porch light was broken. One window had been covered with cardboard. Inside, the heating system barely worked, and the refrigerator made a loud rattling sound every few minutes. There was food, but not much. Rebecca apologized again. She told Marcus she had been doing everything she could. She had taken extra shifts at a nursing home, sold her jewelry, and borrowed money from friends. Hannah's medical appointments had become expensive, and her prosthetic needed adjustment. Marcus didn't know what to say. He had been struggling financially too. He had overdue bills sitting on his kitchen counter. His truck needed new tires. Caleb's school had recently announced a field trip he couldn't afford. But looking around that house, Marcus realized something. Sometimes people didn't need someone to rescue them. Sometimes they just needed someone to stop looking away. The next morning, Marcus called a local community center. He learned about a program that helped children with mobility challenges receive medical equipment and rehabilitation support. He spent his lunch break filling out forms. Then, he called a non-profit organization that provided temporary financial assistance to families facing emergencies. He didn't tell Hannah. He didn't want her to feel like a charity case. Instead, he simply started showing up. He brought groceries. He helped repair the broken porch railing. He found an old bicycle for Caleb and discovered that the same community group had adaptive sports equipment. Weeks passed. Hannah began attending physical therapy again. Her confidence slowly returned. One Saturday morning, Marcus took Caleb and Hannah to a small community soccer field. Hannah sat on the sidelines at first, watching children run across the grass. Then Caleb handed her a soccer ball. She told him she couldn't play. Caleb said he hadn't asked whether she could. He had only asked whether she wanted to try. Hannah looked at Marcus. Marcus nodded. She stood. Her first attempt lasted less than 10 seconds before she lost her balance and fell onto the grass. She didn't cry. She laughed. Then she tried again. And again. By sunset, Hannah had kicked the ball farther than anyone expected. Marcus watched her from the sidelines, smiling. He had no idea that the little girl who had asked for a chair at his table would eventually teach him something about courage. But life was not finished testing them. A month later, Marcus lost his job. The manufacturing plant announced layoffs after a major contract was canceled. Marcus came home with an envelope in his hand and sat silently at the kitchen table. Caleb immediately knew something was wrong. Marcus tried to hide it, but children notice what adults think they can hide. The next morning, Marcus began applying everywhere. Construction companies, repair shops, warehouses, maintenance departments. Nothing worked. The bills continued. Then his truck broke down. For the first time since Rachel died, Marcus felt genuinely afraid. He wondered how he would feed Caleb. He wondered how he would keep the apartment. He wondered whether all the effort he had made to build a stable life had been meaningless. One evening, he sat alone on the apartment steps after Caleb went to bed. He held Rachel's old photograph in his hands. He whispered that he was tired. He admitted that he didn't know how much longer he could keep pretending he was strong. The next morning, someone knocked on his door. It was Rebecca. Beside her stood Hannah. Marcus opened the door and stared at them. Rebecca handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter from the director of the community center. The organization had heard about Marcus's volunteer work. They had learned that he had helped Hannah get therapy, transportation, groceries, and adaptive sports opportunities. They wanted to offer him a paid position coordinating maintenance and family support programs. Marcus couldn't speak. He asked why they would choose him. Rebecca answered simply that sometimes the person who understands hardship best is the person who knows how to help others through it. Marcus looked at Hannah. She was smiling. He realized then that kindness had never been a one-way street. He had thought he was helping Hannah, but Hannah had quietly helped him too. The new job wasn't glamorous. It didn't make Marcus rich, but it gave him stability, health insurance, and something even more important, purpose. Over the next year, Marcus helped dozens of families. Hannah continued therapy. She joined an adaptive soccer program and eventually became one of its strongest young players. Her prosthetic leg was upgraded through a non-profit grant. Rebecca found a better-paying job and slowly began rebuilding her own life. And Caleb remained Hannah's closest friend. But there was one thing Hannah never forgot. That rainy evening. That empty chair. That simple question. Can I sit here? 1 year after their first meeting, the community center held a small celebration for children participating in adaptive sports. Hannah was invited to speak. She walked onto the stage with her prosthetic leg visible beneath her jeans. She was nervous. There were dozens of people watching. Marcus sat in the front row beside Caleb and Rebecca. Hannah took the microphone. She told the audience that after losing her leg, she had started believing that she had lost more than part of her body. She believed she had lost her future. She believed people would always see her as different. She believed she would always need permission to belong. Then she told them about the diner. She explained that she had walked inside that night expecting to be rejected. Instead, a tired single father had pulled out a chair. She said he hadn't asked what was wrong with her leg. He hadn't asked why she was alone. He hadn't looked at her with pity. He had simply made room. Hannah's voice trembled. She looked directly at Marcus and said that sometimes a person doesn't need someone to fix their life. Sometimes they just need someone to say, yes, you can sit here. The room became silent. Marcus wiped his eyes. Caleb leaned against his shoulder. Rebecca cried openly. Then Hannah said something that broke Marcus's heart. She said that for the first time since her accident, she had stopped wondering where she belonged. Because someone had shown her that she belonged somewhere simply because she was human. The audience stood and applauded. Marcus didn't stand immediately. He remained seated, remembering the frightened girl from the diner. He remembered her wet jacket, her trembling hands, her empty expression. And he remembered how little it had taken to change her night. One chair, one meal, one moment of kindness. After the ceremony, Hannah approached Marcus. She didn't say much. She simply hugged him. Marcus hugged her back and told her that he was proud of her. Hannah smiled and said she had something for him. She handed him a small wooden plaque. It had been painted by children at the community center. The words were simple. Thank you for making room for me. Marcus stared at it for several seconds. Then he pulled Hannah into another hug. He realized that Rachel had once told him something he had forgotten during the hardest years of his life. She had told him that a person's legacy wasn't measured by how much money they earned or how many things they owned. It was measured by how many people felt less alone because that person had existed. Marcus finally understood. He hadn't saved Hannah. Hannah had saved a part of him too. She reminded him that grief didn't have to close his heart. It could open it. And sometimes the people who enter our lives when we least expect them become the very people who help us find our way home. Years later, Marcus would still remember that rainy evening. The diner would eventually close. The old building would be renovated into a small bookstore. Caleb would grow into a thoughtful young man. Hannah would become a physical therapy assistant, determined to help other children who were learning how to live with disabilities. And Marcus would keep the little wooden plaque above his desk. Whenever life became difficult, whenever another family needed help, whenever he wondered whether one small act could really matter, he would look at those words. Thank you for making room for me. And he would remember that kindness rarely arrives with dramatic music or grand gestures. Sometimes kindness is simply noticing someone standing alone. Sometimes it is buying an extra meal. Sometimes it is offering a ride. Sometimes it is listening without judging. And sometimes it is nothing more than pulling out an empty chair and telling someone that they are welcome. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these emotional stories reach people who may need a little hope today. And before we end, I want you to leave one special comment. There is always room for kindness. Write it below if you believe that one small act can change someone's life. Because somewhere tonight, there may be a person standing outside a door, afraid to ask if they belong. There may be a child who thinks they are a burden. There may be a lonely parent who is quietly falling apart. There may be someone who doesn't need a miracle. They just need someone to make room. And if you ever find yourself sitting at a table with an empty chair beside you, remember Marcus and Hannah. Don't ask what someone has lost. Don't ask why they're different. Don't ask whether they deserve a place. Just pull out the chair. Make room. Because sometimes, the smallest invitation can become the beginning of an entirely new life.